Before we even get started today, how many people have heard of the Elixir Fountain or listened to it? Okay, so you kind of know what the deal is. I don't usually give soft talks. I usually give code talks and everything like that. So today I was going to give this soft talk, but I decided to deep dive into the beam and the actual... Everybody's kind of glossed over. No, I'm really not. Everybody's had a great day of talks. I've seen several of them. I was a little late today, but I've seen some great talks we had today. Give it up for all the other speakers. Thank you. And so what I'm going to do today is something a little bit different, and so bear with me, because what I'm going to try to do is I'm just going to try to tell you a little bit about the community, my experiences. I have a lot of people actually send me emails and say, hey, we kind of want to hear your story. And I'm like, really? I talk every week. Do you really want to hear my story? We have great guests. So I'm going to do something a little different today. I'm going to actually kind of tell my story, how I got involved in Elixir. I'm going to look at the community a little bit. And I'm going to kind of forecast where we're going and where we want to go. The name of this talk, of course, is Where the Wild Things Are, because we're all wild for Elixir, right? Yeah. So how many people have read the book or even know that there's a book called Where the Wild Things Are? Okay, originally I was worried that people were thinking that I was going to get up and read the book. So I can do that. I don't mind. I have slides for that, actually, just in case, because I was thinking, if there was an extra lightning talk spot, I might go ahead and read it. But that being said, let's go on. So yes, I am Johnny Winn. I'm the host of the Elixir Fountain podcast. I'm a longtime member of the Elixir community. I've actually been using Elixir now for over 3 years. I remember the first part of the story. See, we're going to kind of jump around a little bit. The first part of the story is I was actually going to speak at a conference called MagmaConf, which was kind of a Rails sort of conference. It was mainly around Ruby. And so I was going to give a Ruby talk on metaprogramming Ruby, which was fun. But I had decided on the way that I had kind of stumbled upon this language called Elixir. And Dave Thomas had just come out with a book. It was really early on. I think it was only a couple of chapters. I think it was like literally the first release that they had of it. And so I bought it. And I read it on the plane. Bad idea heading to a conference to give a talk that you've already written, because all I wanted to do was talk about Elixir. And I spent most of the conference talking to anybody that would listen to me about this great new language that nobody was going to use for another couple of years. So, as you can imagine, I've been around for quite a long time. Does everybody know what this is, right? Has anybody been there? I think it's like right up the street. You can actually take the underground. What's funny about this is so my family and I, for those of you that don't know, we're on like this 3-month tour of Europe. And this is one of the places that I really wanted to go. Now, typically, in one of my talks, if you've seen them before, my kids always make an appearance, right? Has anybody seen one of my talks before? Okay, well, don't worry about it, because we'll make sure that the kids appear. So, this is my son, AJ. He actually is not relevant to this talk at all, but it just wouldn't be right to make a talk without one of my kids in it. So, what are we going to do? Well, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to kind of look at the past. We're going to make a little mischief. We're going to hear my story and kind of how I got into programming to start with, and then how I got into Elixir eventually. Because I think it's one of those stories that's probably going to seem very familiar to you, not because you've heard me tell it before, because I'm sure you all listened to it and have heard me tell it before, but it's probably going to seem similar to you or familiar to you because it's probably similar to your story. How many of you came directly to Elixir and it's your first language? See? So you came from somewhere else. How many came from Erlang? How many came from Ruby? Yeah. I'm going to offend probably some of you at some point, but I'm going to try not to. Then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to kind of talk about the terrible roars. I know everybody's heard them, right? This is the present state of the Elixir community. And it's not necessarily our roars. It's maybe from the outside. But we're going to talk about it and just at least acknowledge that it's there and what we can do about it. And then finally, we're going to look towards the future. We don't all have to be the king. It's okay to have other languages living alongside of us, and everything is fine. But let's start out. So how did I find Elixir? Now, when I first started writing this talk, with the idea of the book, if you've read the book, This is a story of Max who starts causing problems for his parents, depending on if you've seen the movie, it's his mom, but the parents send him off to bed because he's creating too much mischief. And when I first heard that, I was thinking about like Jose and the Rails community, and like kind of like, you know, he was like trying to do things and people were saying, no, we're not gonna do that, we're not gonna do that, we're not gonna make these changes. And so what did he do? He went off to his own room, and I really wanted to get a picture of a little tiny cottage that like he was way on the, and then he wrote his own language. So how I realize in working on this that it's really, I'm a mischief maker. And I would assume that most of you, if you're here, you're probably kind of mischief makers too. You're not happy just with the status quo. You're not happy with the answers that you've been given. So you're going to seek other answers in other places, and you're going to test what you know. It's not all about just doing the next thing. It's about figuring out why you did it in the first place. And so I started development way back in 2000. I told you I'm a dinosaur, right? At internet years, I might as well have been like, you know, Big Bang. So way back in 2000, and when I first got involved in it, I was doing Perl, PHP, VB6. How many VB6 users? Yeah, bring back VB6. DLL hell. I don't know. Oh, yeah. I can tell you, actually, I'm going to digress again, because see, that's what I'm going to do in this talk. I'm going to digress a lot. Actually, if you walk away from this talk with anything, good luck. So, funny early developer story. This is way back when. So I had actually written an application for this company. In my genius self, I had it on a hard drive. Because of the DLLs, you had to make sure that all the DLLs were set up correctly, or your VB6 app was not going to work. And so I had the brilliant idea. I would just load it up on a hard drive with the OS, and I would just hand it to them, and then they would do it. Well, we go to hook it up, and shoot, it didn't work. So here I go walking back, and I'm going out of their office, carrying this hard drive in my hand, and I go to get in my car and drop. Yeah. I spent the next 3 days up rewriting the application because I had lost it all, yes. Lessons learned, young developers. So anyway, of course I did that for quite a while, and then I got into C#. Now, the great thing about being in C#, I digress. No, I'm just kidding. There are actually really cool things about it. As a language, I actually enjoyed working with .NET quite a bit. It was really kind of the sense of the community and how I felt was like, I felt very detached from everyone. I didn't feel like I was a part of anything. You know, especially this is there was no open source .NET community. There wasn't even a thought of it remotely. And actually, you could look at the source code, but you weren't allowed to touch it or do anything with it. Even if you found a problem and fixed it, you could say something to Microsoft and they would say, thank you very much, now leave our code alone. But that being said, so I did .NET for a number of years, but one of the things that I really liked about it was a solution. How many .NET developers or ex.NET developers? Yeah, we have meetings once a month. They're called meetups, where we talk out our issues. No, so the solutions were great, though, because you could create multiple projects in them. Well, each project, you could separate your concerns. You could have certain business logic in one. You could have database logic in another. This sounds really familiar, right? Yeah. Yes, this sounds very familiar. Umbrella projects. Actually, somebody said, is it just me, or does umbrella projects seem a lot like solutions? And it's great. You had separation of concern. Now, you could also mess this up considerably. Trust me, my first few passes at it, everything was all entangled. It didn't matter. But you can actually separate things out. This is great. This is a great platform to build on. But the problem was I didn't feel that connection. I didn't feel that community. Like there was no, this is really kind of before conference. And I'm sure there were conferences, but I wasn't attending them. I very much at this time worked alone. Believe it or not, I didn't run my mouth all day. I just sat at my desk writing my code. A friend of mine shows me Ruby and says, look at this cool new thing called Rails. You can actually put together a prototype app like that. And sits down in 5 minutes and shows me how to build a prototype app, and it was great. But I was still pretty entrenched in the .NET world. For one, if you've changed, how many people have changed languages from job to job? How many people took a pay cut to do it? A major pay cut. Yeah, because all my skills were .NET skills. So apparently it didn't transfer to Ruby. So when I had to leave, I ended up getting a paycheck cut in half to go work in Ruby. Now, my wife, who did not make it in the slides, she does not like being in slides. I found that out. Also, probably not a good idea to let her watch the videos because then she comes back and says, why did you talk about me in the talk? So I just won't, huh? Oh, by the way, this is very interactive. You feel like you're interviewing me, feel free to throw up a question. I don't mind answering it. I don't mind diverging, if you've noticed. So, and basically, I'm just killing time till the drinks start, right? Yeah. So in any case, I told you you're not making out of this talk with any good information. So in any case, so I got into Ruby, and I started working with it for a long time. And at first, I loved it. And I loved how it was so different than .NET. Like, I could express myself better in Ruby. You know, all the stuff all the warm and fuzzies everybody gets when they go to Ruby. And then, of course, I went to my first conference. And I saw other developers. And they were talking about development. And we had similar ideas. And this was great. I mean, really, I could reach out and talk to somebody. And we could talk about testing. And we could talk about the right way to do things. And we could talk about all sorts of things like the law of Demeter. And yeah, those conversations go way too long. But in any case, that's where I started getting that feeling again, though. That like it felt fake. After a few conferences, and it's the same talks over and over again, and you're going to it, and people have the same ideas, and you realize that everybody is really starting to think the same. It's kind of a weird feeling when you're like, okay, I'm not getting anything new out of it anymore. I'm just rehashing the same things. And then, of course, in the Ruby community, the Rails community, whatever you want to call it, what did we have emerge? Thought leaders, right? Yay, thought leader. And they tell us how you're supposed to think to make sure that we're all still thinking the same way, right? Because we all want to stay on the same path because we don't want to diverge from the group, right? Yeah, have you heard of groupthink? Where to achieve harmony, we all try to think the same way so as not to upset anything. Well, that seems kind of counterproductive, doesn't it? I mean, when you're going to build something new, you want to kind of question what you're doing. You want to make sure you're doing it right. Just because you've been told to do it a particular way doesn't mean it's the right way, right? How many people have rewritten code when they realized it was wrong? Oh, come on, every hand should go up. I have, I know. So anyway, so the idea of group, now the funny thing about all this talk is, and it was right in this talk, one of my biggest pet peeves is thought leaders. And honestly, this sounds like a thought leadering, you know, but I'm not. I'm seriously not. I'm trying to give a good community talk. But now, what got me about Elixir in the beginning, and really I found it in Erlang. My problem with Erlang is that I liked the syntax. Robert, good job on the syntax. But what I realized is I live in Jacksonville, Florida. You know how many Erlang shops are in Jacksonville, Florida? 2? Oh, I was about to say where. I'll send them my resume and see what I can get going, you know? No, there is 0. Do you know how many were, I guess this was going on 4 years ago? Yeah, still 0. That didn't matter. So anyway, so when I found Elixir, I was like, oh, this is all the greatness that I have in Erlang, but with a syntax that I can sell. Because keep in mind, I was a consultant for a long time. Believe it or not, I can sell things. But yeah, so selling technology, I could take somebody an Elixir application, and they wouldn't be afraid of it. They wouldn't be worried who was gonna work on this code, you know, because if you show somebody Erlang, a lot of times, that's what you hear. Who are we gonna hire as developers? Well, I'll call one of them up because I have them all on speed dial. But the other thing is Elixir was new, and it gave me something that I didn't have in Ruby. Keep in mind, I'm coming to Ruby pretty late. This is 2011, 2012 when I got to Ruby. Rails was, I want to say 3, something around there. I mean, it was still, what was it, 189? See, I knew I was going to trip. Who was talking to me about tripping on stage? And I just did. Anyway, it was a lot of things were built. And I would go to work on something, and I'd be like, here, I've got to figure out how to write this. And they're like, there's a gem for that. Oh, that's right. I'm going to bring in this 10,000 line of code gem because I have one thing that I need. Smart idea. And I used to, in one of the talks that I gave about Rails, and I've stopped giving the Rails versus Phoenix or Rail or Elixir versus Ruby talks. You know why? Because it's counterproductive. It doesn't do us any good. But one of the talks that I did give, I actually showed a Rails dependency map. I couldn't get it small enough or big enough on the screen to where you could even tell. It looked like one of those models of the universe. You know, it was like so spread out, you couldn't read it. You know, maybe, you know, Luke was over here and Han and Leia were over here somewhere and they couldn't find it, and there's always missing pieces. So anyway, but when I got to Elixir, what I found is I could discover things again. There was an open canvas, tons of things not written. So in my first days, how many people have tried to use Erlang dates aside from Robert? Yeah. How many people like using Erlang dates aside from Robert? Yeah. Huh? What was that? Robert, do you like dates? I understand. No, we're all friends here. This is an Elixir conference. You can feel free to, say whatever you feel. So anyway, one of the first libraries I wrote was a library called Chronos, which really all it was taking an Erlang date and turning it into something that made sense to a human. It basically did all sorts of formatting and things like that. But the other thing is a lot of early days of Elixir, a lot of it was still just wrappers around Erlang code. So you could find out what was happening. It was really easy, because I used to get this question all the time too, was, do I have to learn Erlang before I learn Elixir? Now, no. Should you? Probably. Back then, you had to learn some Erlang, because if you didn't learn Erlang, there was a lot of times you were going to hit a wall because you were going to get so far, and then all of a sudden you have to get into the Erlang code to figure out what was going on. I mean, now we're talking 3 years ago too. This isn't like anything recent. But what it did, it allowed that freedom to discover again. I got to work with dates in a way that I hadn't had to work with dates in I can't remember how long. Actually, never. I've never seen a date as a tuple before in my entire life. What were you thinking? So, in any case, so that was like one of the first little forays into it. And of course, then I wrote, I got kind of involved. I met Chris. You got to remember that this time too, there was probably, I know Francesco's going to correct me on this, but I swear there was only 20 Elixir developers in the entire world. I know there was more than that, but it felt like that. And so it's kind of weird looking back when I kind of think back about Elixir 3 years ago, or I guess 2.5 years ago, where it was like we all knew each other. And really, the first Elixir Conf, there was 100 people there. And we all had spoke before. And we had all been using Elixir. Nobody had used it in production, but there was very few, maybe 25 to 30% of the people had never seen it before, had just wandered in because they thought there was free donuts. And there were, for a nice low fee of conference entry. But so, it was one of those weird things where it very much felt like a community of friends that were all just kind of getting together and discovering things on their own. And I remember working with Chris back in, I think if you go back in the Phoenix logs, like the 4th commit, it says HashRocket Workstation. Yeah, that was me, sorry. But I remember in the early days, we were like, there was a lot of discussion even back then of like how Phoenix should evolve. What should Phoenix do? Chris had his idea, and of course it was his library, so he's going to do the way he wants, and I had my idea. Obviously, his idea was right because everybody's using Phoenix now. But there was a lot of things that, I kind of wanted to diverge on. A couple of libraries that came out about this time that I wrote, Calliope, which, how many people use Haml? That's it? Okay, I don't use Haml either. I used to. When I worked at HashRocket, they were big. Our designers all wanted to use Haml, and so the nice designer that was helping me do all my stuff, because my front-end development looks like a developer developed it. How many people develop or design like a developer? Twitter bootstrap. No, so yeah, it's horrible. So I used to have a lot. I apologize for my slides too. They used to be so nice and so creative because I had a designer do them up for me. It was nice. But in any case, the ability to discover. I wrote a parser for the first time. I am not a CS graduate. Hell, I'm not even a college graduate. I mean, I guess technically I graduated from a vocational school. But I'm actually a high school dropout. I dropped out and got my GED, and I have taught myself everything I know. So I never had to write a parser. That kind of stuff was done for me. It wasn't until I found Elixir that I was like, hey, I should figure out how this stuff works. And that's a big part of what we can do in Elixir now. How many people do web applications? How many people have written a parser? How many people, well, you don't count. Actually, it was funny when I was watching your talk. It was great. I'm talking to Lewis, by the way. I know that the camera doesn't know who I'm talking about. But when I was watching your talk, I was like, yeah, I remember doing that. And I'm not saying I was right the first time I did it, but I had never done it, and it was fun to do. It was fun to explore. And the other thing is I wrote a library. We were talking about doing a mailer, and of course there was no real mailers. There was the Erlang stuff. But I ended up writing a library called Hermes. By the way, if you look at my repos, all the names are probably Greek mythology, except for Coyote, which is Native American mythology. But in any case, the Hermes library, guess what it did? Sent messages. It opened up a TCP socket and communicated across sending binary strings back and forth to send an email. How many people have done that? Yeah, the hands are, well, Robert. So anyway, but that's one of those things that I had never done. And I took the time to do it because nobody else had done it yet. And one of the things that I would like to see in the community as we go on in this talk is I want us to keep that feeling of discovery. Just because Phoenix is there doesn't mean you can't go write an OTP application to serve up web pages. Doesn't mean you have to use Phoenix. Now, I'm not saying that in your production environment that you're selling to consulting or a company that you're consulting for, you should go and write your own thing every time. But on your own, you should learn how these things work. You should take the time to learn how they work, not just accept what they are. So that kind of brings us to the present. How many have heard the roars? Do y'all know what I'm talking about? The ones coming from some other communities where they're like, we're just fine. Our stuff works. We don't need Elixir. We have Action Cable. And that's not a knock on them. I've noticed this over the last few years, that things changed in the Ruby community and in the Rails community to keep up with other things. So they saw, when Phoenix channels first came out, this was, I think, 2 years ago at RailsConf, DHH had already started looking at what Phoenix was doing and realizing that they needed it. Do you know how many applications actually need WebSockets? Hardly any. Really, it's fluff, it's Chrome. Most applications that you're writing don't need it. Can you use it? Sure. I can also slice my sandwich with a chainsaw. But it's not necessarily going to be right. But see, so what we hear from a lot of the outside community is we hear, well, you're just an upstart language. And it's not just the Ruby and Rails community. There's other languages. And I remember a few years ago at Erlang conference, Erlang Factory, there was why do we need Elixir? We're just fine. Well, why don't you need Elixir? Is it hurting you? Is it causing you problems? Is it creating issues for you? No. And actually, Jose has done an awesome job trying to encourage, especially the core team, to commit back to Erlang, to try to help out. When we find things in the Elixir community that we think can help the Erlang community, we try to give back. And that's something we also need to foster in the community. Is we need to foster that feeling that we are not just here by ourselves, but we're a part of the greater sense of the developer community. and we need to give back to those. Now, of course, with all this, there's this. So I'm going to tell you a funny story, because I don't have any funny stories. This is my only one, I promise. So way back when I first got into Elixir, and of course, me and my excitement for Elixir and everything that I wanted to do with it and everything like that, and of course, it was like at version, I don't know, 0.7 or, I mean, this was like back in the day. And of course, I was working as a consultant, and I kept saying to everybody, I'm like, this is going to be the next big thing. This is going to be. And this is actually, we're 2 years now into a promise that I made that in 5 years, Elixir was going to take over the market that is now currently run by Ruby and Rails. It's not a slant on Ruby and Rails. But if you watch most languages, they have a lifespan. They have a life cycle. They kind of go through changes, unless you're an enterprise and then you're still on Java. But that's the first thing that happened, is they ignored it. They were like, that's just a passing fad. It's not even going to probably hit 1.0. We're not even going to worry about it. Well, then we hit 1.0, and we were showing, look, we're moving fast. Things are working. Well, then, of course, they start laughing at you. It's great, but nobody's using it. There's only a few people. The second Elixir conference had about 250 people. Then they fight you. And we're kind of hearing those fights right now. Well, this isn't going to work. Why don't you just use what you've been given? Why are you out there trying to do something different? But then you win. Because at that point, you don't fight back. You just do what you're doing. You write good code. You take advantage of things like OTP, which needs to be brought to the forefront in Elixir community. You need to make sure that what you're doing and the face that you're showing to other communities is a positive one. There's no reason to go out and bash another community. There's no reason to say, oh, your release, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Enjoy their successes as much as your own. And that's how you win in life, really. Now, this kind of comes hard for some Erlangers because, and I love this quote from Joe. He did a blog post when he started his new blog, so this is probably a couple of years ago now. I don't know, can everybody read that? I don't really want to just read it out loud. But, you know, he says, and I think he even said on the show that, like, it's hard for the Swedes to really promote things. Well, we have to get out and promote things. How many people have used the MyElixir status hashtag? How many people know about the MyElixir status hashtag? So how many people know the story behind it? Yeah, there's a couple. See, I know who the real listeners are. So anyway, the story behind the MyElixir status, and it was actually funny. I was talking to one of the guys at Platforma Tech. I try not to name names too much, unless I'm related to them. But I was talking to him, he's like, you know, the MyElixir hashtag is great. It's like caused Elixir to kind of go viral. Well, and the reason being is keep in mind, go back a couple of years when there felt like there was only 20 developers. I started a newsletter called the Elixir Fountain. So every week, I went on Google and tried to find articles on Elixir to send out to the 20 of us. Chances are 10 of them wrote the articles. So this is really difficult. This is hard to track things down. Not to mention, I don't know who's working on Elixir. How do I know what people are doing? I'm in Jacksonville, Florida. There's no, believe it or not, 2.5 years ago, there was no meetup in Jacksonville, Florida for Elixir, or Erlang, as we've discussed earlier. So in any case, I started the hashtag as a way to get people to kind of cheat on me having to do extra work. Especially if you're in Florida and you're Google, because I'm sure it's all proximity and sort of thing. If you Google Ruby Elixir, there's a club in Tampa, Florida called Ruby's Elixir. And how many people have found Elixir strings? Yeah. I don't play guitar anymore. But in any case, so it doesn't do me any good. But so I used the MyElixir status was a way to communicate with everybody around the world to find out who was working on Elixir and what they were doing, if they were writing blog posts, if they were putting out libraries. Because the idea is that it's not bragging to show what you've done and to share what you've done. It's bragging when you shove it in their face and you say, ha ha, I'm better. So keep that in mind. I mean, go ahead, use the hashtag, share it with everybody, let people know what you're doing. Show people your libraries, have people look at your code. If you write a blog post, share it. Make sure it gets out there, because if nobody hears it, does it matter? And that's been a big part of how we've gotten to where we are in the Elixir community. Do you know how many people were at ElixirConf USA this year? There was almost 600 people. So in 3 years, it's gone from 100 people to 600 people. Do you know how many people raised their hands when we asked, or when Chris asked, I should say, how many people have Elixir in production? Most of the room. Actually, we all were kind of talking afterwards, and we were kind of blown away. Because at the first one, most people said they had kind of played around with it or whatever. There was maybe 4 or 5 of us that had it in production anywhere. So to have most of the room of 500 plus, almost 600 people say that they have Elixir in production right now, it's a pretty big feat in 3 years. So where are we now? And where do we want to go? We're kind of at like a really turning point in our community's development cycle, I guess you could say. We have the opportunity to remain a sounding board. We don't want to become an echo chamber. We can talk about how great things are. We can say how wonderful our applications are now that they're written in Elixir, even though that's really mostly because of Beam. We can say all these things, but if we don't continue to question the answers, if we don't continue to explore what we're doing, it's all for naught. Because in a few years, it'll be something else. And you'll get bored, and you'll move on. But if you take the time to learn things, learn deep, learn deeper than you've ever learned before. Find out, build things that don't even make sense right now, but spend the time to do it. The Nerves project is actually a really cool thing because I know nothing about it. And so I love the idea of playing with it because it's teaching me ways of coding that I've never done. Because believe it or not, when you go back and you code your web applications or whatever it is you do in your daily job, it's going to change the way you think. It's going to change, just like Elixir changed the way you thought about building applications, it's going to change the way you build your everyday Elixir applications. You're going to learn more about OTP than you ever thought. And OTP is awesome. One of the projects that I've been playing around with recently is a project called Coyote. You can see the code. Is James still here? Okay. Yeah, James is going to yell at me. But in any case, it's a playground for me right now. It's a way for me to push the boundaries of what I know and how I know how to work with OTP to see if maybe I don't know it as well as I think I do. And I'm building something that I haven't ever built at this low level before, which is basically a web library for dealing directly with the Cowboy web server, which may change in the next few days. Like I said, it's very experimental. And I can't wait to release it because part of the thing that I want to do with it is I want you to build OTP applications and use this library and then just send a notification to say, hey, I'm online now and here's my routes, route to me. I don't want to have to build a Rails app or a Phoenix app. Sorry, that was not a slip, I swear. That was, see, I told you I'm going to offend a Rails developer. So anyway, I don't know, how are we looking on time? Have I rambled on enough? Do y'all like me rambling? I can go on. Trust me, I do this every week for like an hour at a time. It drives me nuts. So you have to decide now where you want to go. Do you want to just continue building the applications as you know how now? Or do you want to build things new and different, and you want to change the way you think about how you develop? That was a question. Okay, so you guys are all content? Do you want to build something new? Yes. Do you want to change the way you think about things? Yes. Come on now. With that, I'm done. Oh, one more thing. I forgot to mention this. I'm a rugby player. Gary, this is for you. So, Yeah, those are all actually me back when I was in much better shape than I am now. Now, I know typically I don't know if we have time, but most times we do like questions. I don't know. Really, I've explained it all. But the listeners of this show know about 5 Behind the Code? Yeah. Does everybody like 5 Behind the Code? Yeah. Would you guys like to do a quick 5 Behind the Code? Yeah. All right, who's got a question?
So I'll go first.
Okay.
Is this on? Hello? So my question to you, Johnny, is have you ever been in a band? And if so, what were the names of the bands that you've been in?
So this is, yes. So the longest running band I was in, I was actually playing guitar for, and it was the most successful one. We did one show. And we had a name, so we were really, it was the band's name, it was called Zamaries. So our singer thought he was Jim Morrison. He also thought he was a poet. He was neither. And he came up with this brilliant night. Because, okay, now I'm going to probably get myself in trouble, but, hey, whatever. I was like 16. So we were all sitting around smoking as 16-year-olds do, believe it or not. And he was like, I got the name, man. It's Zamaries. We're like, what? No, Zamaries, man. I'm like, I'm just going to play guitar over here in the corner. You call it whatever you want. But yes, that was the name of the band. And we played one show. We had great reviews, and then we went out and partied and broke up 2 days later. So.
Hey.
Hello.
Let's imagine that you can't write Elixir. You're not permitted to write Elixir. And you have to build, I don't know, some system which tells stories. What language are you going to use instead?
A pen and paper. The English language. There you go. I'm pretty good at English. Kinda. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I still really enjoy Ruby. I can't look at it the same way that I used to. I still enjoy C#, but even doing C#, I don't know. It's one of those things. There's so much of an environment. I'm so used to scaling back to where I was as a Vim user for a long time. I'm actually using Emacs through Spacemacs now. So it's kind of like an environment that I'm having to cope with. But for the most part, I like being able to just open up a file and write code. And Ruby kind of gives that. I don't have to do a whole lot. So, any other ones? Oh, one back.
Oh, I got one.
Okay.
Have you ever played rugby before?
Um,
No. I actually do have a question.
Okay.
It's from the show. If you could have one superpower, why would it be teleportation?
So, if I could have one superpower, but why would it be teleportation? So I could move on to the next question. No. I don't know. Actually, if I was going to have a superpower, I kind of go back and forth on this anyways. Because, believe it or not, I like the Hulk. And so that absolute strength really is kind of cool to me. I like the idea of, even if it is in a mad rage and I can't control it, I kind of like it. It's kind of fun. It makes for a good weekend, But no, and two, I've played contact sports, most of my life and stuff like that. Rugby being the most recent, and so that's probably the superpower I would most like. Just because I don't think I would use it very often, except when I was on the pitch or something like that. So, yeah. All right, who's next?
What's the story of your tattoos?
Oh, there's too many.
Pick one.
So this one right here, y'all can't see it. It is actually the date that I was married to my wife and her name. Ha! She got into the talk. So funny story, I will tell a little bit, if I have a little bit of time, I don't know. I can try to tell it quick. So my wife and I I saw something on Twitter, as one does. I was probably working at the time. But, so it was talking about this idea that you can explain true love and all that kind of stuff by the fact that all particles came from a single particle, a set of particles that was the Big Bang. And so when people feel attracted to each other, it's because the mutual attraction of the particles that want to be back close together, which is kind of a cool story. But then you look at my wife and I. Now, my wife and I have pretty much spent within a few miles of each other our entire lives, aside from a short period where my family moved us up to Chicago for a couple of years, but then back down and right back next to her. We actually think we even went to the same daycare as a kid, which is funny because it was completely on the other side of the town where we met. So we kind of moved across town together and then ended up dating in high school. And then we broke up because, me, really, honestly, it was me. Because I was a young punk kid and she was like, I'm not dealing with that. And so anyway, we both kind of went off and got married and had kids, and then we came back together after we both got divorced. And we were like, hey, you want to go on what we call it, we joke about it being our undate, because our real anniversary is December 31st. Try getting a table for your anniversary on December 31st. Is that big over here? New Year's Eve is still big over here, right? So yeah, it's okay. It's the whole new year and everything. So in any case, so we called it our undate, where we were just going out as friends just to catch up, and we've been together ever since. And pretty much inseparable. I brought her even to Europe, so.
On that note, please give a warm round of applause for Johnny Winn.